Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala syarifil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Alhamdulillah, we are still discussing on chapter 4 on holistic human behavior and the loss of learning. This is mostly the writing of Professor Muhammad Mali Jenkins from his manuscript, which I have extracted. Alright, so we are still discussing on human potential, and in the previous video I have explained to you about the nature of genes and the science of epigenetics, and today we're going to discuss another subtopic, that is differences in inherent human potential, tendencies and behavior. So each and every one of us have our inherent human potential, tendencies and behavior. So each and every one of us have different potential, which I have explained earlier on. For example, if you want to be a sprinter, you must have 2 legs. If you have 1 leg, you can't be a sprinter unless you use artificial leg, and you can maybe run just as fast, but there's science and technology that can overcome your inherent disabilities to become a potential. Alright? But what is important is that this inherent potential could be both positive and negative, and tendencies and behaviors can also be positive and negative. So if we take one example, for example, in the whole problem of alcoholism that is creating havoc throughout the world, alright, of so much problems. And for example, alcoholism is destroying whole societies. For example, whole societies of the North American indigenous population, the Indians, they are being riddled with extreme alcoholism, now extreme drug addiction. The same thing with the whole people, indigenous Australian, extreme alcoholism, and they have very much shorter lifespan. They have the highest number of prisoners in prison. They have the highest number of problems in terms of family and so on. So they are actually destroying themselves through what? Alcoholism, which is not their culture. It was never the culture of the indigenous Australian to have alcohol. But alcohol was introduced by the white settlers to these people. So these are gradually killing them. So the indigenous population of Australia is not actually increasing, it is decreasing, because 1, they get addiction, 2, they die young, 3, they don't have children. So when that happens, this population will be destroyed. Through what? They have these inherent tendencies, because they are not open to the conditioning of alcoholism. So I show you, it's not because of their nature, it's not because of genetics. Remember, this is not because of that. It is the exposure to alcoholism, which was never the culture of the indigenous Australian for thousands of years. But only in the last 100 years, they were exposed to alcohol, and they are not able to adapt that fast, okay? But even in the Western world, the whole idea of alcoholism is now destroying the whole society, in terms of violence, family violence, in terms of child abuse, in terms of incest, and so many evil that we cannot imagine. Alright, so there are many things in terms of the differences in inherent human potential, tendencies and behavior. I'm going to read 1 or 2 paragraphs. Understandably, no one become an alcoholic because of the inherited physiological or neurological factor. As I told you, basically, even you have tendencies for alcoholism, you have a gene that shows some weakness, you can rectify that by changing your lifestyle and by changing the environment in which the exposure to alcoholism can be much reduced. Also, the question of whether some people are born more prone to become alcoholics than others is sometimes very difficult to give a yes or no answer without being misleading. Yes, it is true, some people are born more prone to become alcoholics than others. Some people are born more likely to do or be anything more than others in any way, because of the environmental factor, and maybe, as mentioned earlier on, the weak genes that they have. That is because every person is born different from all others, and those differences will show up, however much or little, in the way each person interacts with the environment. With that being said, I can now give you a better answer to the question. No, for all practical purposes, some people are not born to be more prone to become alcoholics than others. So this is our belief system. Within Islam, you have the free will by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have some weak genes, but if you remove the environmental influence, the social, intrasocial, and the physical environment, then you have less alcoholics. Alright? So this is maybe, it may be an extreme example. For example, you don't find alcoholics in the whole of Saudi Arabia. Why? Because there is no availability of alcohol in Saudi Arabia. Maybe it's an extreme example, but you have extreme alcoholics in, for example, in North America. Why? Because alcohol is sold in every corner shops. So that availability alone creates opportunity to become an alcoholic. In other words, although there are differences among people related to how prone they are to become an alcoholic, nowhere is that range of difference is there a condition which would actually make the person more prone to become an alcoholic. So if the condition is there and the availability of alcohol is not there, then there will be, even though there is some tendencies in terms of the weakness in genes, he or she will not become an alcoholic. Nobody is born significantly more prone to alcoholism than any other person. What differences do exist are not significant. Another important question is whether or not mental illnesses is inherited. This is another subject, or whether we'll discuss later in another chapter, whether mental illnesses are inherited or not. So what will happen then is the factor will result in the existence of those behaviors, for example alcoholism, throughout human society are complex. I can say this, though with no changes in the present inherited component which affects the expression of those behaviors, we could have a world that had no alcoholism, no mental illness, other than the specific physical abnormalities passed on genetically, no crime and no homosexual activities. The environmental influences which pervade our present world society subtly shape certain individuals' behavioral pattern until they become alcoholic, mentally ill, criminals or homosexuals, and many other of these problems that we're facing today. I think this might be another area where things which I say, while true, will either be found to be difficult to believe or perhaps even found to be offensive. So when you say these things, from the Islamic perspective, yes, we can accept it. But from the liberal perspective, so what? I'm an alcoholic, I'm still normal. Or so what? I'm a drug addict, I'm still normal. So what? I'm an LGBT, so what? So this so what kind of individualism creates a society based not on the maintenance of the social structure and moral norms of that society, but a society that becomes free for all. All right? Once a society becomes free for all, as many other civilizations in the past, they degenerate. And when they degenerate, then they self-destroy themselves. So we are moving through that phase because in this so-called era of freedom, we are free to do anything and everything without limits. Freedom cannot be constituted to be anything and everything. Do you have the freedom to murder somebody else? You don't have. You have the freedom to destroy somebody's life by giving them alcohol? You don't. But there is a difference. Oh, murder is wrong. Yes, we will put you in jail. But if you supply alcohol to the indigenous people of Australia and they die of alcoholism, well, that's okay. This is the paradoxical ideas of idealism of freedom, which is destructive. So whoever supplies alcohol to the indigenous Australian is just as guilty as those murdering, because the havoc, the chaos, the destruction of the whole strata of Aboriginal culture, value system, society, family is destroyed by this one thing, alcoholism. All right, now compound that with drug addiction. What do you have? You have massive problems. So that's why when we talk about these ideas within the context of Islamic psychology, we must understand that our worldview is not the ultra-liberal. Yes, we have certain liberal worldview of accepting. For example, we can say that we can accept an alcoholic to reform him or her to become sober, to become a good citizen, to avoid alcoholism, which they know, alcoholics know. That's why you have organizations like Alcoholics Anonymous. They come and they have counseling session, group counseling session. They are struggling day and night to get away from the evil of alcoholism, and yet because of the addiction, because neurologically they are addicted to alcohol, they find it very difficult to get away from it. And without the social support, it is even worse. If you can find alcohol at every corner of the shops, street shops, you will tend to go back there. So this is where, when we discuss about how we're going to go about developing an Islamic psychology, we must understand the basis of divine revelation in terms of the adab or the nature of human existence. So that's why in Islam, alcohol is haram. Drugs that cause addiction, anything that cause addiction is haram. Now they are, for example, in certain countries, legalizing marijuana, ganja, which you can smoke or you can inhale or you can ingest, you can do whatever and go high. All right, and who will be responsible when you cause an accident or you cause a disaster? All right, so these are situational conditions where this whole business of alcohol, drugs, both legal and illegal, are billion dollar businesses by the super rich, enslaving the masses towards addiction, destroying their lives, and the only salvation would be to get away from it. And how to get away from it if we don't have the adab or the moral value system, the ihsan within the framework of believing in Allah, believing in the laws of Allah insofar as what is good, what is bad, what is prohibited. So in Islam, we know very clearly, even we have those tendencies towards some of those evil things, we have to refrain because we have a greater role to play in this life, to become a true and sincere servant of Allah, always knowing that we are answerable not only to ourselves, not only to our parents, not only to our society, we are answerable to the Rabbul Alameen, who created us, who gave us His life, who created us to live on this earth or as a temporary phase, the phases of our life from our primordial existence to our contemporary existence, and to return back to Allah in a world hereafter, which is a whole thing which inshallah we can discuss. But we have to infuse this idea to our young people so that they do not fall trap of this so-called free-for-all, do anything that you want, and then you get entrapped in addiction and alcoholism, whether it's alcoholic beverages or whether it is pornography, whether it's sex, whether so many addiction, that it is exposure at a very, very massive scale in the 21st century that is going to destroy human society, including the Muslims, unless we come with a via media, a way out, and that via media, that way out is for us to live a life knowing our inherent potential, to avoid evil, and to do our best, to feel our best, to be the sincere servant of Allah, striving to make ourselves good, helping others to be good, making the world good as a Caliph of Allah, inshallah.